This is Seminar 2 for Leadership Change and People Management, and I'm Lynn Borrow, your tutor. Before we begin, I'd like to make sure that you have got with you a syllabus for Leadership Change and People Management, the assignment brief that you've been working on, the assignment guidelines, and your prepared work from self-study following Seminar 1. So the objectives for this session are that initially we'll review and confirm your self-study tasks from Seminar 1. We'll have reviewed the lectures from and activities from Lecture 2 to 6, which cover learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3, workforce contribution to organisational strategy, employee resourcing and engagement, and then discussed approach to an assessment requirements for the assignment related to the selected organisation, the one that you have opted to go for. So first of all, I'd just like to bring us back to what the self-study tasks for this particular seminar were about. And if you remember correctly, what I asked you to do is to look at the activities from the seminar, capture the key facts to meet the assignment requirements on organisations of interest, and then finalise your company selection and, if necessary, get approval for that. So just as a bit of a quick checklist, what you needed to have done was to have researched, downloaded and collated information on your organisation, that is your choice of organisation, from as many different sources as possible. And I suggested that included company website information, including corporate purpose, core values and mission statement, annual reports, so that's the chief executive statements with reference to workforce strategies, links to people, recruitment, management and practices, and the career development for staff, what sort of things that they advertising, ethical standards for people management, and that you should also have had a look at press reports for the organisation, which will provide independent information on strategic change in the industry, particular reference to HR and workforce strategy, and then ideally confirmed approval of a selected organisation with a tutor or somebody who is actually supporting you in your studies. Okay, so what I'm going to focus on now you've completed 6 lecture sessions, you've actually completed learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. So we're going to go through each of those in a bit more detail. So you'll recall that learning outcome 1 was about understanding the contribution that an organisation's workforce can make to competitive advantage and the advancement of the strategic vision and values. And then those are divided into what we call assessment criteria. And those assessment criteria are the ones that you really do need to focus on, because they're the ones that you have to meet within your assignment. So the first one, 1.1, was explain how HR strategies can advance the abilities, motivation and performance of employees. 1.2 was explain and justify the necessity of alignment and bundling between an organisation's corporate strategy and its HR strategy if the HR strategies are to deliver sustained synergies. Critically review the theory, principles and practice of high performance working, and design HR strategies intended to maximise employee performance and commitment across a comprehensive range of specific organisational scenarios. Now, all of that was covered in lectures 2 and 3 of the lecture series. So that covered learning outcome 1, not necessarily in exactly the same order, but pretty much close to it. So then we go to learning outcome 2, understand and be able to apply strategies for people resourcing, retention and development. So this was about critically explaining and evaluating professional approaches to the search for and selection of organisations, a selection of employees. 2.2, evaluate strategies for effective deployment and redeployment of employees for addressing performance issues, including absence, and enhancing levels of employee retention. And then analyse 2.3, the concept of the employer brand or employer choice, recognising the strategic benefits of this label and the ingredients which cumulatively permit a significant employer brand. And we did quite a lot, if you remember, about what we mean by employer brand, status to be achieved, and explain and evaluate the learning organisational model. So that's learning outcomes 2, and that was completed in 4 and 5, lectures 4 and 5 of the sessions. And finally, learning outcome 3, which was all about enhancing employee commitment and engagement with an organisation using incentives and other mechanisms. And we looked at 3.1, assess the strategic benefits to be derived with an organisation whose workforce exhibits a high level of employee engagement, outline, evaluate the factors which have a place before a high level of employment engagement can be achieved, and then design strategies for enhancing level of employee engagement in a comprehensive range of organisational scenarios. 3.4, critically analyse the purposes for which an explicit performance strategy may be constructed and applied. And 3.5, devise and justify a practical performance strategy intended to enhance employee commitment and contribution with an identified corporate context. So the corporate context is the business that you've actually chosen to use for your case study, for your assignment. Critically assess the role of performance review and performance appraisal within an organisation's improvement, reward and development strategies, and then critically analyse both the principles and application of total reward. And all of that was covered in the 2 lectures, which were 6, basically for 6. Okay, so how are we going to actually use those learning outcomes and the assessment criteria contained within that to apply this to your assignment? Well, the key thing here is looking at what we call the command verbs. The command verbs are the ones that start off with every single assessment criteria. And so 1.1 talks about explaining. 1.2 talks about explaining and justifying. 1.3, critical review, and 1.4, design. And these are the words that you need to demonstrate within the assignment that you are writing. So what do these mean then? Okay, terminology. Explain means to make an idea or a situation clear to someone by describing it in more detail or revealing relevant facts. Okay? To make it clear to the reader by describing it in detail or revealing relevant facts, but describing it in detail. Justify, remember 1.2 I think was explain and justify, means to show or prove to be right or reasonable. So to give examples from your workplace or from the company of your choice to show that your arguments, your explanations are correct. Critical review is the next one. Now, critical review The review part is a summary of facts which makes judgment as to the truth, merit, relevance, effectiveness, breadth, contribution of something to a particular field. So you are analysing it in depth and making judgments about how good or not so good the particular points are within that particular context. The next one is about, I'm just going to check something, please, about the audio connection, but I think it's all right. Hopefully it's as loud as we can make it for you. So the next one is designing an HR strategy. So design is actually the key word, but it's in the context of an HR strategy. So remember, this is not about personnel matters. This is about people within organisations and developing a strategy that can align. So it's a discipline that helps firms determine what to do, why do it, and how to innovate, that's the workforce, contextually, both immediately and over the long term. This process involves the alignment of HR and business strategy. So our focus is HR, but it's designing strategy. How do we do that? And the point here with the terminology is that what the examiner is looking for is whether the author, that's yourself, demonstrates knowledge, application in context, and evidenced argument. Okay, now in your lecture sessions, you're going to see that we've used a whole range of different models. And within these seminars, this one and the latest one, the later one, what we'll be doing is capturing some of those points that were made in detail in the lectures so that you can see how they link and transition to a particular point in the syllabus. So this first slide here is about key links of the lectures to the theory of aligning competitive advantage. Now, what did we look at? Well, we decided we knew from the information that's already been provided what competitive advantage means to an organisation. The capability, what do we mean by capability within the organisation? And what do we mean by sustainability? Because the whole point about sustainability means protecting, sustaining and enhancing the human resources. So these slides, which were in lecture 2 and covered slides 3 to 11, are captured in microscope in this particular slide here. So once we've established what we understand and what we believe an organisation has in terms of its advantage, its capability and its sustainability, we can then go to the next stage, which is to assess that for being truly of value to the business for competitive advantage. And if you recall, what we did was we assessed it in terms of value, the value to the business, the rarity of it, the uniqueness, because our thing about core competencies was that, or unique resources, is that they would be difficult for others to capture as well, and they were rare. Inimitability, you recall, is also about how easy they are to be copied by others. So if they're not easy to be copied, it would be much the better. Whether the organisation as a whole is able to or willing to support that issue of competitive or what's perceived to be competitive advantage. And that, you will recall, is called the VRIO assessment. And it's an assessment of what? Competitive advantage. Then you will recall we looked at the whole idea of whether an organisation gained competitive advantage through a market-led approach where the resources of the organisation fit the environment, or alternatively, whether it was a resource-based view where internal orientation and opportunity can be exploited on the basis of the strengths of the organisation. And so that in itself leads us on to how we structure an organisation in terms of its value chain. You recall the primary activities and the support activities. If you're outside in or market led, this will drive. If you're inside out, that will drive. And the helpful tip here is, how would you, and this is what you need to do for your assignment, how would you evaluate your organisation, that's your choice of organisations, human resources for VRIO? Are they the secret weapon? In a knowledge-based economy, very often they are. Their capability, their sustainability gives the organisation longer-term competitive advantage. So think about how you would do that. How would you evaluate the organisation that you have chosen? So this slide looks at how you apply the assessment criteria to your assignment for AC 1.3, which you will recall says, critically review the theory, principles and practice of high performance working, HPW. So let's take a look at that. So again, we have our terminology. HPW, high performance working, is a series of integrated processes, practices and policies that aims to stimulate more effective employee involvement and commitment in order to achieve high levels of performance. So what were the key, that leads us to, what were the key facets of HPW? Well, they were high involvement, reward, commitment, the ability to make choices, degree of autonomy, information transparency, a people-oriented culture, learning and development featured highly, and the fact that there was people management support. And so when we're critically reviewing, we need to have an argument to this, which is to say, well, what's the advantages of having high performance working and what are the disadvantages? And you can easily turn around and say, well, you know, the argument advantages are fairly obvious. You're going to get more involvement. You're going to give them reward, and that's going to allow growth. But there is a downside, and some of the downsides may be about too much time being spent on employee development and not enough on productivity. If you give somebody a day off work, that is a loss of productivity. So those are the sorts of arguments that you might put forward. When you're looking at your slides for this session, it's still lecture 2, and they're slides 12 to 14 that we actually covered when we were doing that. So now let's look at applying assessment criteria 1.4. And that is the principle, point 1, I'm not sure why. Principles for the design and implementation of HR strategies. These are the indicative content, actually, ones, but there was a particular relevance. So, principles for the design and implementation of HR strategies customized for a wide range of scenarios, including transients, mergers and acquisitions, strategic alliances and joint ventures. So transients means going through a period of transition and change. Okay, so going back to our slides, what we can look at is that we actually looked at the company as being a combination of resources, assets, activities, which you can capture in the value chain, and product offer, which is the value proposition. In other words, what you're selling out to your market. So that's what a firm is. And in an environment in which you are looking for cooperation with various organisations as part of your strategy for development, the all for one, one for all, then you're looking, those combination of resources, activities and products can be viewed in making collaborative arrangements with various companies within a marketplace. And so that this slide, if you recall, was about how that takes place and whether you're trying to create an effective supply chain through vertical upstream and downstream relationships, or whether you're looking at some sort of collaboration or complementation between entrants, substitutes and outsiders and also competitors to make a more complete offer. And part of those decisions that are made are dependent upon the relative power and the relationship approach to two or more companies working together in some form of collaboration. And you will recall this slide here that we looked at, which talks about whether we're looking for something that is a balanced approach where two companies are roughly the same and they can gain from a relationship, or whether you're looking for something that is more unbalanced, a bigger company looking at some expertise in a very much smaller company, as an example. So those are the sort of relationship balances and the approach to relationship. And you'll recall that we looked at that. And these were all in lecture 2 still, but slides 15 to 28. And then that leads us to what we're aiming for in terms of our relationship with our either our markets or our actual suppliers, as is shown here. And you'll recall when we looked at this slide that it was very, very much about trying to build partnerships, because partnerships can be very useful for a whole range of reasons. And under the helpful tips, the questions I would ask there are, what are the advantages and disadvantages? Remember, you should be critically reviewing some of these things and devising different ideas of cooperation. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of cooperation with suppliers, competitors and customers? How can collaboration be achieved whilst limiting risk to the business by perhaps being too reliant on one group or another, or sharing too many of your secrets? So take a look at that and refer back. So these are all about ideas that you can use to build your assignment. So that's learning outcome 1 finished. We've dissected that pretty much. So now we're going to take a look at learning outcome 2. And here again, we've got some small command verbs. I don't always repeat ones we've done already because, you know, I'm sure that you understand what they all mean. But in learning outcome 2, we've got critically, we've already had critical review. So now critically explain and evaluate. 2.2 is evaluate. 2.3 is analyze. And 2.4 is explain and evaluate. Not quite the same as that and that, although they often turn out to be quite similar. So what's our terminology then? Well, the first thing is evaluate means to judge or determine the significance, worth or quality of strategies. Critical evaluation also means considering the advantages and disadvantages, or negatives actually. Analyze means to examine something methodically. So that's different from explain. Examine really means looking into it delving into it in a very orderly way and in detail, typically in order to explain and interpret it. But you've got that analytical perspective of detail. And just remember what the examiners are looking for. So does the author demonstrate knowledge, application in context, and evidenced argument? So capture our slides again, and what we've got for the next section is people resourcing, retention, redeployment and release. And in this one slide, you've captured all of that. So our resources, our resourcing strategy based on, do you remember what RBV stood for? RBV stands for resource-based view. So there was a classic, which is either it was to resourcing, either open or closed. Do you recall what an open classic resourcing strategy or a closed classic resourcing strategy is? Okay, just to refresh you then, the classic open is that the company or organisation is open to resourcing based on being flexible to its requirements at a particular time. Closed means it's following a specific procedure, and that doesn't deviate. So RBV1, resource-based view, the first example, is an approach to resourcing through traditionalist utilisation of human resources. You get somebody in to do a job, and that somebody has to have a certain skill set in order to do the job. Then there's the concept of resource-based view focusing on core competencies. What are core competencies, do you recall? They are those abilities, competencies, skills, techniques, knowledge that the organisation has, which is either unique or extremely difficult to imitate. So is our approach to resourcing our staffing based on our unique capabilities? And RBV3 is about the doing rather than the knowledge, in that superior capabilities and processes are what determines its success, rather than the key abilities of the individuals that make up the organisation. So an example of a superior capability and processes was Dell. Dell was the first computer company to decide to sell online, not to have it in store, not to have the hardware there, so that people could just buy. And that was superior process. And that's what gave it a competitive advantage in terms of its method of operation. And in this context, this is all about resourcing with the right people to meet one of these four methodologies. Now, the next thing we looked at within this whole area was the benefits of retention, staff retention, we're referring to. And that's taken from the perspective, if you recall, of employee engagement. That actually, if you engage the employee and you give it, and there's a whole series of things like customer service, customer satisfaction, loyalty, all leading to growth and profit for the organisation and increased productivity and therefore profit, that actually that won't do an organisation any harm at all. And in fact, it creates a virtuous cycle. of good employee retention leading to good customer retention. And so that led us on, you can't read it very clearly here, but you may well recall that we looked at the whole issue about performance and expectancy theory. And this was Porter and Lawler. P&L stands for Porter and Lawler expectancy theory, where the principles were that you expect to get rewarded, you have an expectation for that, and therefore you put in that extra bit of effort, admittedly helped by your abilities and your other general skills, and that in turn over time will turn into superior performance, which will reap its own reward effectively. So that's all about retention. Those two are about retention, really. And then that leads us to this other thing, which is about deployment of staff to other areas, redeployment and departures and release. And all of that information is covered between lecture 3, slides 3 to 26. And then, you know, we've thought about the exit strategy as well. So our helpful tips question then is evaluate the different approaches to people resourcing, the benefits and disadvantages of staff retention and employee engagement strategies, and then dealing with alternatives for redeployment and release. And there's a fair few slides there for you to go through. Our next slides, lecture 4 we're on now, and it covers all the lectures for that, was about, firstly, the employee branding process, if you remember correctly, where an employer branding is about saying that actually this is a good place to work, these are good people to work for, so that encourages talent management to come to the organisation. Then, if you recall, we looked at the whole concept of the learning company and what do you look for in a learning organisation. And from that, that's all about managing knowledge. So the helpful tip there is about analysing and evaluating whether and how your selected company uses employer branding processes and adopts learning organisational practices to gain competitive advantage. And all these little questions under helpful tips are the ones that you need to answer for your assignment. So you can make notes for all of these and then start the write-up. So how your selected company uses employer branding, in fact, whether they do or not, or they do it subconsciously, is still relevant, and adopts learning organisational practices to gain competitive advantage. But that's all the slides for lecture 4. Okay, so now we're going to look at applying assessment criteria learning outcome 3. Here we've got some more command verbs. So we've got assess this time. We've got outline and evaluate, but we've had evaluate before. We've had design, we've had that before. We've had critically analyse, we've had that before. Devise is a new one for us. So assess, outline and devise are the new command verbs. So the terminology for those is assess is similar to evaluate, meaning to estimate the nature, ability or quality of. And you are making a judgment, just as, in fact, you're making more of a judgment than perhaps evaluate sometimes. Outline is a general description or plan showing the essential features of something, but not the details. So if only says outline, that's what you do. You give a general feel. Devise is to plan or invent, and that could be complex procedure, system or mechanism by careful thought. It's not just design, you see, it's actually devise. So you've got to think of all the different parameters. And again, the big question mark. Does the author demonstrate knowledge, application in context and evidenced argument? Okay, so lecture 5, down at the bottom there, it says, these are all the slides, not all the slides, but these are what we covered in lecture 5. And it was about organisational structures and performance, if you recall. And we started off with how an organisation is configured, so that it's made up of structure, its processes, and its relations. And then, and that was how it was configured. And then from that, and that figures with all of these 3 things, we looked at the concepts of division of work. So how was the organisation structured? Who does what? How is that put together? And you recall, we looked at things like the matrix structure, the functional structures, multi-umbrella organisations, so a whole range of different structures. And that then brought us to consider the question about what was the ideal span of control. So how many people are there between top and bottom, and have there been a change from hierarchy to flat structures, and what was the benefits or disadvantages of both? Most people would turn around and say, for efficiency, you want as fewer people as possible from the CEO down to the operative. And that may be true. But on the other hand, it does mean sometimes the span of control is just too great. Say the branch manager may have many people under them, and yet in reality, they can't control that very easily. Which brings us to the next point, which is how does the company make a good job of performance management? And you'll recall we looked at 2 theories to support that. One was goal setting theory, so a bit like the Porter and Royal, we set a particular goal and work towards achieving that. Or expectancy theory, which was much more about performance management. The results of performance management was much more about the rewards that you were going to get as a result of doing the work. So one was about the organisation's aims, or what you want to achieve for your particular aims and working towards it. So you would do a good job because you wanted to aim to get to the goal. Or expectancy, which was the expectation of reward that was going to be received as a result. And then those 2, in practical outcomes, in practical terms, lead to performance appraisal and how that is conducted. And a key measure of performance is about undertaking that performance appraisal, but that's got to be put into the right setting. So is it a developmental process, or is it something else? And their helpful tips for this are critically assess organisational structure, division of work and spans of control, and the impact on performance management in the organisation you've chosen. So consider how best develop a performance management system, sometimes PMS is what you will see it written at, that will maximise employee performance. And again, use your notes, write it all up, and get it all ready for your assignment. So they cover the whole of lecture 5. And linked to that, we then have employee engagement. And you'll recall that under employee engagement, we looked at motivational theory and the different motivating techniques. And we picked up this total reward strategy and what that means in terms of putting together a package for employees that is reward-based and which they will be motivated to achieve for obvious reasons. And our helpful tips questions then: assess the types of motivational theories adopted by your selected company and the techniques they use, which include reward strategies used to increase employee engagement. Are they actually working? How can they be improved? And then suggest when you make up your notes, that you devise some approaches and plans that will help. So, just come to the end of, for a recap of seminar 2. And by the end of the session, we agreed you'll have confirmed your self-study tasks in seminar 1. Review the lectures from lectures 2 to 6, which are learning outcomes 1, 2, and 3, and discuss the assessment requirements for the assignment. And before you finish, I want you to undertake self-study tasks 2 before we get to the final seminar. And so this is what I want you to do for this. From lectures 2 to 6, draft your response to learning outcomes 1, 2, and 3. And just as a guideline for you, again, please make sure you include your concepts, theories, and models, all properly referenced. Apply these within the context of your organisation, supporting any discussion with examples and evidence. Use the command verbs in the assessment criteria to develop an appropriate response and tone for your assignment. Check your work against the assessment criteria to ensure you have covered each assessment criteria as instructed. So remember, I gave you a checklist right at the beginning. And then submit your draft to your tutor if you have one, or get it to a critical friend to have a look at it to get some sort of feedback. So our next seminar will take place preferably after session 12, and it will be a review of learning outcomes 4 to 6. Thank you very much, and I will see you for the last seminar.